a money fight, I get you, and you want to make money. But at some point in time, if you keep telling us that you're taking boxing seriously and you want to be recognized as a big-time box/fighter, you're going to have to fight somebody closer to your age who is a contender at the very least.
Jake Paul fight announcement, another circus, another clown show. A fight between Jake Paul and Gervonta Tank Davis has been announced as an exhibition fight.
The fight that I couldn't believe, that was too insane and honestly just baffling to think would be a real fight in 2025, reminds you that combat sports are the craziest sports on the planet.
Stephen A. Smith did not hold back on the announcement of the Jake Paul vs. Gervonta Davis fight, calling it nothing short of a circus. He acknowledged Jake Paul's ability to promote himself and turn fights into spectacles, but stressed that boxing deserves better. According to him, Jake should at least face fighters who make sense as matchups rather than chasing shock value. For Smith, this fight highlights entertainment over true competition.
I've always been a fan of Jake because I think that what Jake tries to do for the sport of boxing, I think people don't realize the importance of him being able to promote for himself and not being reliant on the promoters who I believe has held the sport hostage. The only critique I've ever given Jake, I just want Jake to fight boxers. Like Nate Diaz, we know his reputation. We know the man can fight. We know in the octagon he could be something special. But we know you breathe on him, he starts bleeding.
It's a fair critique. And you know what? He should fight boxers. But then again, should he? Because I'll tell you what. If you're a human who can rake in $6 to $10 million fighting people that you know you're going to beat, you want to build a resume and a record that's impressive with a good highlight reel, you got to be strategic about this shit. Jake's 25, 26, he's got so much time.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, I get where you coming from. All I'm saying is, we don't know your skill set because you haven't been in there with anybody really skilled.
Analysts argue that Jake Paul's latest matchup is just another circus act in his boxing journey. They believe most of his fights lack any real logic or competitive balance, often designed more for attention than sporting credibility, instead of testing himself against opponents who make sense stylistically or in weight class. Jake continues choosing unusual fights. To many experts, this pattern makes his bouts entertaining spectacles, but not serious boxing contests.
Performance. Jake Paul won the fight. But yeah, that was that. This time, Jake Paul is to take on Tank Davis. Tank Davis, he was recently in the news for being arrested for a domestic violence incident involving one of his mother. He was alleged to have slapped her about the place. The charges were later dropped, to be fair to him, but yeah, that was when he was last in the news. What is interesting is just a couple of months ago, Tank Davis was saying openly that he'd lost his passion for boxing and that he wanted time away from the sport. There was speculation that he might even retire as he was experiencing extreme mental fatigue from boxing, depression, and there were mental health concerns over him. However, I guess the opportunity to earn a truck full of money fighting a completely worthless exhibition fight against Jake Paul was enough to make him change his mind about boxing. Funny that, isn't it? But you know what? I'm not even going to waste your time or mine critiquing this utter nonsense. Suffice to say that this so-called fight we're talking about is an exhibition and it pits Jake Paul, who is cruiserweight, by the way, weighs in excess of 200 pounds. And Tank Davis, who is, he was the WBA lightweight champion, who weighs in at about 135 pounds when he fights. So that's a disparity of some 65 pounds. In old money, that's about 4.5 stone. There's also a significant difference in height. Jake Paul is roughly, 6'1", 2. Gervonta Davis is 5'5", best. So, there's a height disparity there.
Ring Magazine tweeted the stunning news that has the boxing world buzzing. Breaking: Jake Paul will face Gervonta Tank Davis on November 14th at State Farm Arena in Atlanta in an exhibition live on Netflix. Sources confirmed to Mike Carpenter talks for Paul to face Anthony Joshua collapsed over network issues. Paul's last fight took place at 200 pounds while Davis is a champion at 135. This unexpected matchup has fans debating size differences, entertainment value, and the surprising twists boxing continues to deliver. Jake Paul has been pushing his own agenda in boxing, determined to turn his wild goals into reality by investing his own money and creating buzz. He has managed to shake up the sport in ways few imagined. While many dismiss his approach as unorthodox, others see it as beneficial since his financial muscle brings attention and new audiences to boxing. This latest matchup, which nobody thought would ever happen, proves how far he's willing to go.
Dollars, it makes sense, and we've seen that Jake will kind of bounce in between doing these entertainment fights and then, trying to push toward his goal of ingraining himself in the sport of boxing, and kind of does both of them. So it's kind of a weird place to be, because he wants the respect of the boxing fans and the boxing hierarchy and hardcore boxing people, but at the same time he'll gain some of that and then lose some of it. It's like a seesaw of his fights. Like one fight, and be like, okay, that's a real fight, or that's a real fight. He'll go and he'll win the fight. Julio Cesar Chavez, real fighter, maybe past prime, whatever, but Jake goes and wins that fight pretty easily, and then gets a lot of respect, gets a lot of the boxing hardcore love. And you have these talks about him fighting Anthony Joshua, and that was going to get even more respect. More people were like, that's fucking crazy. What are you doing? Myself included. That seemed like a massive risk, but a lot of people were like, okay, fair play. Anthony Joshua, that's a real heavyweight. Jake wants to fight him. He's a psycho, but fair play. And then you announce this one, and it's like, well, that's the same thing people have been saying about Jake for years, so it's a weird spot to be in for him for sure. But I talked about this not being the first choice, and I don't think it was, because Coppinger reports next that talks for Jake Paul to face Anthony Joshua collapsed over network issues. Now, we had all heard the talks, and they were pretty public, from Eddie Hearn, from Jake. Makisa Badarian, Jake's manager, was over in the UK on, I think, Sky Sports, talking about the fight and saying how it was a real possibility and they were really starting to work on it. And now Mike Coppinger says that the talks for Jake and Joshua fell apart over broadcast.
Later, Jake Paul also confirmed the fight through his Instagram writing. Size versus speed, power versus precision, one will rise and one will fall. From Atlanta, live globally only on Netflix Friday, November 14th. His post fueled even more excitement, making the exhibition a major talking point worldwide. Teddy Atlas, a highly respected voice in boxing, has spoken openly about Jake Paul's rise and the sacrifices behind it. He acknowledges that regardless of how critics feel, Paul deserves credit for managing to secure the fights he wants. In Atlas's view, this is not something that just happens. It takes persistence, investment, and a willingness to sacrifice stability for the spotlight. Paul has carved a space in boxing that nobody thought possible for a YouTuber turned fighter. Atlas also pointed out that Jake has genuinely improved his boxing ability. He has put in years of training with top coaches, sparred with professional fighters, and learned to handle himself in the ring. While purists may mock him, Atlas suggests the criticism often ignores the effort and results. Paul has shown many fans dismiss him because of his background, but Atlas insists that Jake's journey is proof of how much he has invested to reach this point.
I give too much credit to Paul. Why? He's done a hell of a job to put himself in this position. He sold himself, he sold his dream, he took his dream, he took his idea, and he put it out there, and he made it happen. Give him credit for that. And he made it happen. And he took risk along the way. Yeah, he picked his spots. He's in the driver's seat. He gets to pick his spots. He's the one bringing the money. He's the one promoting. Yeah, he's the name. He made himself that, coming from where he came from, with all his followers and the whole thing, and just, just the uniqueness of what he was doing. But he has learned along the way. He's not a top guy yet. No, I don't know that he ever will be. He didn't have that amateur background and the things that you usually need to be a top guy. But he has improved. He is a work in progress. He is a guy that you got to give him credit that he's respected the sport. He went out there, he's worked hard at it, and he's gotten himself into this position. Having said all of that, this might be a step too far. Now, when I say it, I'm also, I try to be responsible. I've been in this game 50 years, so I know where not to step, where you could twist an ankle, or worse, you could break a leg or fall down. When I say that with the understanding, too, that Joshua's coming off being knocked out.
The team at Talk Sport reacted strongly to the news of Jake Paul versus Gervonta Davis, branding it a completely unbalanced matchup. Their main point of concern is the massive weight disparity. Davis, a natural 135-pound lightweight, has dominated his division with knockout power, but stepping up against Paul, who walks around at 195 pounds, seems unrealistic to them. The question arises: how can this be a fair or meaningful fight when the size difference is so extreme? This reaction highlights a recurring criticism of Paul's fight selection. Many argue that he chooses opponents who are either much smaller past their prime or coming from outside boxing. In this case, Davis may be at the peak of his career, but he is significantly undersized compared to Jake.
And that's probably where the problem was. So I think that fight is sort of like dead and buried in the water. And we get Gervonta Davis, man, like you guys said it. He's a 135-pound world champion, lightweight world champion. Guy's my height. He's 5'5", and Jake Paul is a cruiserweight. You know, walks around at sort of like 15 stone. So, and it's an exhibition. So, yeah, if you buy into that, then yeah, fine. But it's not one for me.
Spence, let me ask you this: if you were European champion, right?
Yes.
Before you had to retire, so that you were European champion. If you were, how tall are you? What are you at? 4'8", 4'9"?
5'5".
5'5", okay. If you were in your pomp at European champion and you were 5'5" and you were fighting Jake Paul, would you fancy your chances?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, definitely. I think I fancy my chances. I think Gervonta Davis he's in as well. He's one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the world at lightweight. But it's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? It's like you got a guy of 5'5" boxing a guy of 6 foot plus. Cruiserweight, yeah, it's just all a little bit odd. I feel if they're going to do an exhibition, perhaps Jake should have picked someone more his size. Like his last fight against Julio Chavez Jr. Was at cruiserweight. Chavez Jr. was a former world champion at middleweight himself. That sort of made sense, and it was a good win for Jake Paul. You know, he come out there and he beats an ex-world champion, he gets a little bit of credibility, and you go, right, now you're heading in the right direction.
Analysts from boxing scene also weighed in, explaining that this fight is not a win-win situation for Gervonta Davis. Despite being the smaller fighter, Davis carries an undefeated record and a reputation for his devastating knockout power, but stepping into the ring with someone much bigger poses a real risk. If Davis loses, critics will say he was out of his depth due to size. If he wins, some might still argue that Jake Paul was never an elite boxer, undermining the victory.
Win for Gervonta as much as it is for Jake. Jake, it's like, okay, you're fighting a former world lightweight champion. You're bigger, so you have some advantages, even if you're, at a severe skill disadvantage. You're not supposed to expect to do anything, but if you do, it's even, it's bananas for you. It's great. Gervonta, I don't know. What if Jake hits him? Jake's a big guy. I don't know if Gervonta stood next to Jake. Jake's a big guy.
Yeah, he's a big dude.
And Gervonta is small even by lightweight standards.
Right.
So it is a little bit of a David and Goliath fight. It's just the David character in Gervonta is much more skilled. But I guess there's that's the thought process. As far as what it does for boxing, well, absolutely nothing. But then again, what have Gervonta Davis and Jake Paul really done for boxing in the ring aspect? Because Jake, I am a believer in Jake as a promoter, and I think that he has a future as a promoter, and I think he's done very well as a promoter, and I think his company has done some very good things for the sport, and for young fighters, and for brewing talent and making good fights on that basis. But from a fighter's perspective, what they do for boxing from a fighter's perspective, I don't think Gervonta Davis has ever done anything for boxing, honestly. Like I feel like TV has just in this generation, they just create stars, and then they just tell you, okay, we're gonna make this guy the star. It's like they're pre-created, and then they just
Critics argue that Jake Paul's influence in boxing comes not from rankings or merit but from his financial clout. Analysts pointed out that he has the money and promotional power to dictate matchups regardless of whether they make sense for the sport. His ability to secure Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. before this fight, and now Gervonta Davis, proves how much control he wields. To traditional boxing fans, these fights feel more like entertainment spectacles than competitive contests. This level of influence is seen by some as damaging to the sport's integrity. The matchmaking process, usually based on weight classes and rankings, gets bypassed entirely.
Here we go again, people. Another Jake Paul fight, another embarrassing night for boxing. Said this a few times now. I'm really getting sick of it. 10 rounds of tediousness, whereby Jake Paul was just throwing punches. A lot of them didn't have any zip on them against an opponent that was just compliant. He holds boxing became basically pimping the sport. That's what Jake Paul is doing. And I find it unacceptable. I really do. The whole Jake Paul brand is actually bad for boxing. Taking advantage of the sport, pimping the sport, fighting washed up MMA fighters, former fighters, and now we're hearing that he's about to enter the WBA ranking to be in line for a world title shot. Absolute farce. Couldn't get away with it in any other sport. And that's what makes me.
Former world champion Carl Froch was blunt in his assessment, calling the situation an absolute joke. According to Froch, discussions for a Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua fight were nearly finalized, with the deal about 99% complete, yet, instead of facing a heavyweight giant like Joshua, Paul pivoted to Davis, who is literally half his size. Froch found this decision baffling and saw it as proof that Jake is more interested in shock value than genuine competition. Froch's remarks echo what many boxing insiders believe, that Paul carefully selects opponents for maximum publicity and minimal risk. Facing Joshua would have been a monumental challenge, but fighting Davis creates a sideshow effect.
Jake Paul was supposed to be fighting AJ. Eddie Hearn announced 99% done, which we just spoke about. What's next for AJ? Potentially Jake Paul. But it now looks like Jake Paul is fighting one of Anthony Joshua's legs. He's fighting Gervonta Davis, somebody who's a quarter of his size. I don't even know what's going on. Has Eddie Hearn been played? Let me know what you think, but the AJ fight with Jake Paul's finished. Gervonta Davis, fake Paul, November. I don't know what's going on in the world of boxing. This is an absolute joke. What next for AJ? We'll get into this, and there's so many questions I want to get into.
Paulie Malignaggi, the former two-division world champion and boxing analyst, admitted he never saw this matchup coming to him. The announcement came out of left field and stunned the boxing world. While Paul has made headlines with unlikely opponents before, putting him against a lightweight like Davis still caught Malignaggi off guard. He described it as an unpredictable move that shows just how far Paul is willing to stretch the boundaries of matchmaking.
He talked about the Rhodes fight. I thought it was so utterly ridiculous, especially that you essentially manufactured Gervonta into a star without really having him fight any major threats in his career. I know the groupies, they're gonna say somebody like Leo Santa Cruz is the biggest name on your resume. You got a problem. Like Santa Cruz was probably dying shot by the time he fought Gervonta Davis. Santa Cruz, who 90% of his own resume was against guys you never heard of. And again, it was a one-directional fighter who started at bantamweight and they fought at 130. It's your best win. Pedraza's a solid win, I thought, even though it was a weight drain for Pedraza. Pedraza was so weight drained that he'd actually already lost to Ednacheri. He should have already not been champion by the time Gervonta fought him, but they robbed Ednacheri in that IBF title defense of Jose Pedraza, so that Pedraza remains champion. I remember because I worked that show and commentated that fight. So, it's a sneaky good win, but it's sort of below the radar, not that good of a win. Weight drained Pedraza. Pedraza went up to lightweight and actually fought better once he didn't have to weight drain himself. Who had been struggling already at 130 prior to being knocked out by Davis. Like I said, he'd already lost to Cherry and was lucky to keep the title in the Cherry fight, 130. So, Cherry, mind you, a guy that I beat way back in the day. I don't know. Mind you, I beat him easily, like 9 out of 10 rounds, 10 out of 10 rounds, something like that. I don't know. I really don't don't know what to make of this, man. I sure as hell love to hear the comments. Gonna generate curiosity for sure. You know, Jake Paul is huge. Like, he's gonna be almost a foot bigger than Gervonta Davis. This is an exhibition, so there's not gonna be an official winner unless there's a stoppage. So things like glove size, ring size still have to be dictated and figured out. I don't know. I don't know what you do with this. I don't know what boxing's coming to. This is what happens when you manufacture a star instead of letting stars organically create themselves.
Daniel Cormier, the UFC legend and analyst, offered a different perspective. He pointed out that Jake Paul's fight against Mike Tyson on Netflix broke the internet, setting a precedent for massive crossover events. Now with the Davis fight also heading to Netflix, Paul is proving that he can create spectacles that capture mainstream attention far beyond boxing's usual reach. For Cormier, this makes Jake a significant figure. Even if fans refuse to admit it, Cormier also argued that Paul is better than many fighters. People give him credit for he trains seriously, takes risks in the ring, and constantly raises the stakes with his matchups, while critics reduce him to a social media star. Cormier believes the attention Jake brings is valuable, and that his skills have improved enough to warrant recognition whether fans agree or not. Paul has undeniably changed the conversation around boxing, and that in itself is a form of success.
Twice, big numbers. Jake Paul fought against Tommy Fury, big numbers. Jake Paul, who I believe, and I have told you guys this time and time again, he's much better than people give him credit for. One, Jake Paul is not an amateur fighter, like some try to say. Jake Paul has money, so Jake Paul is getting trained by the best boxing coaches that money can buy. He's full-time boxing. There are a lot of people that say he may do some other stuff. I don't know who he was going to fight that was saying that he was juiced up and he was ignoring him. Or was it Logan Paul? One of them. But at the end of the day, this kid's training to be the best fighter in the world, or the best as he can be, and he understands what losing would do to the perception of who he is in fighting. We were yelling so much about him fighting someone. Fight somebody your size. Fight somebody, a real boxer. Stop fighting MMA guys. There were so many things that people were mad about in regards to his level of competition and the people he was competing against. Well, today we learned that Jake Paul has his next opponent. His next opponent is by far the most credentialed guy actively. Many of you want to jump down my throat and say, well, Mike Tyson is actively